Greetings and welcome to the 43rd episode of Morrowind Modding Showcases. As always, I'm your host Dark Elf Guy, and this week we have another 13 mods for your viewing pleasure with an overall random theme. And not to spoil anything, but you might be in for a bit of a humorous surprise towards the end. And in any event, as always, you can find all the download links for each mod shown down in the description below. So why don't we just go ahead and get started with our popular mod of the week, which this week is Better Armor Tribunal Pack by Hedgehog12. Now, much like Hedgehog12's other mods, this is a graphics replacer for all the armor sets added by the Tribunal expansion pack. And the first thing you can see here, I forget what this one is called, I think it's Adamantium or something equally hard to pronounce, and it's a pretty major change really. Basically, this mod completely overhauls these armor sets, making them more high resolution and definitely more unique and cool looking than what you'll find in vanilla Morrowind. And you can also see the Royal Guard armor worn by the guards around the Palace and Warnhold here. And again, I just gotta say, this is a pretty awesome armor replacement mod. Hedgehog12 has consistently made some really great armor and creature replaces for Morrowind, and this one especially does a great job of making Tribunal's armor more on par in appearance to that of more modern games like Oblivion and Skyrim. And another thing to point out here is you can actually see the weapons each guard carries, such as a long sword attached to their backs and a dagger to the hilt, a nice touch that really adds an immersive quality to the game. And naturally, this mod also includes an overhaul for the High Alternator armor set that you'll find on the temple and indoor guards around the city, and again, with everything else, this could easily fit in alongside Oblivion game armor, I just gotta say. And finally, this mod does come with an optional ESP for the Dark Brotherhood armor, which is a nice touch because there's already a lot of popular Dark Brotherhood armor replaces out there, so you can choose whether or not to include this in your Morrowind installation, and it's a sort of Daedric influenced design for the Dark Brotherhood armor. And just sort of moving on, our next mod here is the House Mod of the Week, and this week we have Witch's House by Fox, aka CandyGirl24. And what this mod does is it adds a small cabin to the woods of Solstein, not to mention a few trees to add to the atmosphere and general feel of the landscape. And this is just sort of a secluded home in the style of the Raven Rock architecture. And inside you'll find a, well, I guess you'd call it a very unique furniture arrangement with some very interesting decorations. And this really isn't your typical run-of-the-mill house. You'll find a lot of things like a cat, which is probably a witch's familiar, along with couches, skeletons, a number of plants for alchemy purposes and the like, as well as a witch's brewing cauldron, and in fairness, it is supposed to be a witch's house. And some of the rooms that are included here are a small kitchen area and lounge on the first floor, as well as a study on the upper level. And something you'll notice here is that the author has used a lot of Danae's containers resources, so basically everything here is a container you can use for storage and organizational purposes. And there's some unique items hidden about here and there as well. And you also find a small cavern attached to this house, and while somewhat ominous looking, it actually functions as a sort of player bath for you to use, and really it's all fairly atmospheric, I have to say, and it's just sort of a nice cozy looking house mod in general. This week's gameplay mod of the week is Better Charging by Hell's Wake, and this is one of two charging mods that came out recently, and we'll be covering the other one in a future episode. But to start out with, what this mod basically does is it makes the charging process when you start a new character just a bit more immersive, and also streamlines the process a bit. For example, now when you get off the boat and see the Neen, there will actually be a thunderstorm going on, much like in the intro dreams with Azura talking to you. And you also find that the Census and Excise offices have been given a major overhaul with a sort of office window here where you'll be able to give your information. And you'll also notice that all the valuable items, like that limeware platter, are now safely behind lock and key, back there out of reach from your cheating gaze. And another thing to note here is that those annoying pop-ups have been removed, since as the author notes, most of us already know how to play the game and have for quite some time. And in order to streamline the process even more, you can now head directly to the offices to get your orders, which really just only makes sense. I never quite understood why these two rooms were separate buildings anyway when they are all part of the same Census Bureau. You also find that the dining room here has now been guarded, which means the amount of loot you can get is limited to Fogoth's magic ring, which does make for a bit of a harder start, but it is more roleplay friendly, certainly. And when you're done with the intro process, you'll now get a single pop-up, and that's it. You're free to explore Morrowind at your leisure, and this is certainly less time consuming than the vanilla version of the charging process. Next up we have our Town Mod of the Week, and this week we have Epic Dagon Fell by Mike and Ike. And if you're familiar with the Epic Mod series by Mike and Ike at all, this is pretty much the same thing, only with Dagon Fell, a small coastal village, rather than the major cities or the great houses like the previous mods in the series have primarily focused on. And as with the previous epic mods, it is mostly cosmetic, adding buildings and ruins to sort of give an epic sense of verticality to the landscape. And personally, I think it really achieves that effect quite well. There's just something very awe-inspiring about seeing a small imperial village dominated by the ancient ruinous towers of the Duomo in the background, and really it is very atmospheric and adds perfectly to the Sheogorod region, which is primarily known for the number of Duomo ruins that inhabit it. And now, naturally, most of the new buildings added to Dagon Fell don't really have any interiors, so to speak, and unlike with previous epic mods, there's not really a whole lot of village expansion going on. There's just a few new shacks and Nordic-style houses, but the majority of the new additions come in the way of Duomo ruins, and that includes a really very impressive Duomo bridge that goes over the entrance to the Dagon Fell harbour. And there's just a lot of really neat details here, like the dwarven statues that guard the passage to the gears that frame each Duomo light along the side of the bridge. And just going through here into town, you can imagine the impressive vista that awaits travellers arriving to Dagon Fell for the first time. And speaking of Duomo ruins, Mike and Ike has actually created a new Duomo dungeon along the outskirts of Dagon Fell for you to discover. And really it kind of contains more of that epic sense of scale, but I'm just going to leave off here so as not to spoil the surprise for you. For our items mod of the week this week, we have Waffle Warfare by Melkor Dark, and what this mod does is it gives you a new quest to find with Thranna in Tel Brenor, where she'll offer to give you a mysterious Duomo plate, and basically this will set you off onto a sort of treasure hunt. And this plate works much the same way as the lucky pick from Danjib's mod back in May, and that'll give you a warm, cold response depending on which direction you're travelling in, ultimately taking you to a particular Duomo ruin. And when you do find this Duomo ruin, you'll have to do battle against a set of Duomo Waffle Centurions, with their waffle armor and waffle irons, and these guys naturally drop a lot of waffle related loot as you might expect, including oh so delicious waffles for you to consume. And not only that, but you'll find a ton of waffle and breakfast related items scattered about these Duomo ruins, like Duomo plates, forks, knives, Duomo syrup, waffle irons for cooking waffles, and naturally waffles. You may also find a few strange Duomo spectres wandering about, like the chief waffler here at this Duomo waffle stronghold. And he has a ton of unique dialogue explaining the ancient art of Duomo Waffle Warfare, a powerful set of weapons that ensured that the Duomo's foes would fall to a tasty doom. This fellow also sells an assortment of waffle goods for you to buy, including waffle projectiles, throwing waffles, more waffle irons of course, and delicious syrup. To show off a few of the waffle-related items included in this mod, here you can check out the waffle iron, a simple blunt weapon that you can use to strike down your foes. There's also a breakfast knife, and also, most notably, a Duomo waffle launcher that acts like a crossbow, and it shoots waffles at your foes, leaving them blinded with a sugary feast. And it has to be said, the Duomo Waffle Launcher is extremely effective. Who needs St. Jib when you can drive the cliff racers out of Unfell yourself with waffle power? No cliff racer can truly resist the delectable goodness of a waffle barrage. Soon the fiends and foes of Unfell will lie dead at your feet, victims of this ultimate secret weapon of the Duomo and the delicious treat of a good sugary breakfast that's part of a complete meal and a healthy start to the day, to be sure. Not only does this mod add new waffle weapons and items for you to find, it also adds in some new dialogue to the main characters in Morrowind pertaining to these waffles, explaining bits and pieces of waffle lore, including good old Fargoth here, who might be hiding a waffle secret of his own somewhere. And here you can see an assortment of the new waffle items added by this mod, though this isn't all of them. There's also waffle hats for you to discover on your own. But in any event, this is a fun collection that not only includes a complete breakfast, but also provides you with a meal that'll stare you down with googly eyes. Truly, you've never had a decent breakfast until you've had one that looks you right in the eyes as you eat them. Next up we have our quest of the week, and this week we have more quests by Sophie Krishna. And the first thing I should mention about this mod before we get too far into it is that it is still being worked on. The goal of more quests is, as you might imagine, to add more lore-friendly quests that blend in fairly well with the vanilla game. And right now, this mod adds 7 new quests in total, mostly involving the Mages Guild chapter in Wolverine Hall. But the author has planned to continue adding more quests in the future, and with that out of the way, this first batch of quests provides some pretty standard fare options that just slightly expand on the characters and personalities of the Wolverine Mages Guild. A few of them are more magic based and designed with Mages Guild characters in mind, though some of these quests can be done by anyone regardless of whether or not you're a member of the Mages Guild, and there's even a few thief related quests that you might find. And in any event, these are mostly fetch type quests where you have to find or steal certain items from the quest givers, and all in all they fit right in with most of vanilla Morrowind's quests and add some extra things for you to do while you're in Wolverine Hall, which is a particularly nice addition given how sparse this area is in terms of quests. The writing in particular is also pretty good, with overall decent and not overpowered quest rewards, and personally I'm really looking forward to seeing more of this mod in the future, and Morrowind can certainly never have too many quests in my opinion. Next up we have our Landmass Mod of the week, and this week we have Prison Island by JMK. And this is a fairly unique landmass mod in that it isn't really a town or anything of that nature. Instead, it's quite as the name would imply, it's an island with a dedicated Imperial prison on it. This prison is surrounded by a moat of lava, sort of ensuring that would-be escapees will have a particularly hard time trying to get out of it. And the prison complex itself, which is essentially an Imperial castle of sorts, has a small inner yard for inmates and several towers and high walls for the guards. And right as you arrive at this particular curious island, you'll actually get to see an inmate try to make an escape, though they're a bit unsuccessful in this regard, and this sort of serves as your first introduction to Hithenmore Prison. And as with all JMK mods, you'll find that the NPCs here all have some unique dialogue, along with some established lore about the prison and its purpose in the provincial waters of Morrowind. And you also find a number of quests here in way of bounties offered for capturing or killing wanted criminals around Vvardenfell, and these range in value from 2,000 to 6,000 gold, and depending on the criminal there might be a higher bounty for bringing a criminal in alive rather than as a corpse. And as you might imagine, Hithenmore Prison is full of, well, prison cells and prisoners with long corridors of cells holding some of Vvardenfell's dangerous criminals. And naturally, some of these prisoners might offer you a quest to help them escape, if you're so inclined to help out petty criminals. And something else you might discover here as you explore this prison facility is a working death chamber where you can choose the method of execution, such as poison, fire, or electric shock, though obviously this might not be the moral thing to do. And as I mentioned before, this mod does add criminals that you can go after for a bounty across Vvardenfell, such as that orc that we just saw. And once you've killed or captured them, you can turn in for a bounty reward here. And just sort of moving on, for our NPC Mod of the Week this week, we have Femvec Replacer by Sorosgal 9875. And this is a fairly simple mod that does one thing and one thing only, and that's replace the model of a Vec, as you can see here, with a more sort of a feminine version. This is actually somewhat in keeping with established lore about the poet god, who has been described at times as having both male and female-like features, and in general being somewhat androgynous. And this replacer also comes with an optional sort of rainbow coloured hair option, which I personally think looks quite nice here, and adds well to Vivek's mystique, so to speak. And now it should also be mentioned that this mod also comes with support for both Better Bodies and Robert's Bodies, which is always a nice plus. This week's new Meshes and Textures Mod of the Week is RR Mod Series Better Ships and Boats by the Resday and Revival team and Cult17, and what this mod does is quite simply replace the boats and ship models around Morrowind with all new, completely redone and made from scratch replacements that have more of that sort of modern day charm in terms of detailing and the like. And indeed, these are some positively exquisite looking ships that are fairly beautiful, particularly to the eyes of anyone who enjoys nautical vehicles, and you'll especially notice that these ships have that sort of characteristic Morrowind charm to them, with just a slight hint at Telvanni roots along the front and back in particular. And some absolutely majestic looking sails, it has to be said, and something worth pointing out here is that the sails will typically have the emblem of the great house the ship is associated with. And since we're just sort of starting out in the Alvelothy territory here, you'll see the Great House Redoran emblems here, but in Telvanni or Great House Lolu territory, you might see their Great House emblems instead. And taking a closer look at the ship here, you can see that there's just a lot more detail in the ship design than anything found in vanilla Morrowind. There's actual gears and pulleys holding the sails in place, with little mechanisms coming up and out of the deck, and it really adds nicely to immersion and the realism of these ship-faring vessels. You can also see some more of these longboats here, which have been replaced with some pretty high resolution and detailed models, much like the ships have been. And you also notice on the background there's another one of those ships with the Telvanni House crest upon its sails. And just to sort of finish off showing off ships from each great house, you can see a Hlaalu vessel here with the great house scales clearly indicated on its sails. And this is just sort of a nice touch that always reminds you of whose territory you're going through at any particular moment. And of course, the ship interiors have also been replaced with, again, some nice higher resolution and more detailed models, and they have the same basic layout as Morrowind's vanilla ships, but with extra features that you might discover, such as lantern hooks that hang from the support beams that could be used for carrying lanterns and the like, and ropes around some of the pillars. And overall, this is just a fantastic model replacer for Morrowind's dated seafaring vessels, and it really brings the seas of Morrowind alive. Next up we have our Modder's Resource Mod of the week, and this week we have Varieties Nidib Trees with a small forest by Ice and Eric Henry. And this mod is basically a resource mod that takes the original Nidib trees from the famed and ill-fated Nidib project and retextures them so that in total there's around 80 different varieties of trees for you to use in your own projects. And these trees are just perfect for creating large and dense forests, something that was noticeably absent in vanilla Morrowind, and which works out great with these large numbers of trees. And it has to be said that a particular advantage with using these Nidib trees is that they actually have a fairly low face and poly count, at least in comparison to Verts trees, for example, which is always a plus given that one of the biggest issues with forests in Morrowind is the FPS hit. And with Nidib trees, you can get a pretty dense environment without too big of a hit on FPS, which is something that should always be considered by modders when making these sort of dense environments. And as we said, that these trees really do make some just lovely forests, as you can see here just south of Ebonheart, and this modder's resource does contain a demo file adding this particular forest next to Ebonheart and Vivek that you can check out for yourself before using the resources in your own projects. And in total, there's about 6 different types of tree models, and each of these have 12 different retextures for you to use, so you can really make some varied and colourful forest environments. Though it has to be admitted that the models themselves can be a bit dated. Just keep in mind that the Nidib project did fall apart in 2003, so these projects are over a decade old, but regardless you can still make some really awesome forests with these resources. Now for our underrated mod of the week this week, we have Sheogorath the Frozen North by KJS94. And essentially what this mod does is it completely overhauls the Sheogorath coast region of northern Vvardenfell to make it better fit the extreme northern position that it's in. After all, Silstein is about equally far north to the Sheogorath region, and yet it's covered in ice and snow, but Sheogorath in vanilla Morrowind is portrayed as having the exact same terrain and temperature as the Azura's coast region. Now you'll find that the Sheogorath area, including the town of Dagonfell, is covered in snow and ice, much like its Solstein counterpart. And there's 2 versions of this mod, one that keeps the flora of the Sheogorath region intact, including flowers and mushrooms that I actually think clash rather nicely with the snowy terrain, kind of like a springtime snowfall effect, but if that bothers you, there's a second version that makes the flora more scarce in keeping with a colder climate, and needless to say, in both versions this mod changes the actual weather patterns of the Sheogorath to better fit the winter theme, including more cloudy and occasionally snowy days, which again makes for an interesting mix of giant mushrooms and gradual snowfalls that I actually think is very atmospheric and characteristically Morrowind. You also notice that many of the waterways in the Sheogorath coast region have been iced over. This isn't just a simple terrain retexture mod, it also covers other parts of the environment as well, and also adds in some Blood Moon creatures to the Sheogorath coast region as well. And moving on to this week's Blast from the Past mod of the week, we have Private Mole Base Tribunal Blood Moon by HB. And this mod starts out when you meet a merchant in Caldera who offers to sell you a private mobile base, which is a large flying fortress-like base that you can purchase for a fair sum of gold. And something to note here, you can also buy a few upgrades to the base, and you'll also need to buy a key to each room and to each location that you can teleport the base to. All in all, this is a very expensive home, and it'll probably cost you in the realm of about 500,000 gold to buy all the features that this property has. And here you can see the base itself, and depending on which teleport location you've unlocked, you can have this private mobile base move to just about any city, town, or village on Vvardenfell. And the house itself is a sort of Velothian-Rodoran mix of architectural styles, mostly Velothi as you can see here. And it is a rather dominating sight in the sky, easily the size of Wolverine Hall down below. And here you can also see it in a different location, this time over Balmora, and an interesting feature of this house mod is that you can set it to hover above cities, or you can dock it at a mage's guild or some other location close to the ground for easy embarking and disembarking. And one of the first rooms that you'll find on the interior side of things is the main control room. From here you can decide which city the private mobile base will teleport to, or hover over as you so desire. And an important thing to note about this functionality is that it isn't exactly free. You have to keep the private mobile base powered up with the souls of golden saints, and every time you teleport the base it uses up so much power. Luckily you can stockpile golden saint souls, so you won't have to worry about it for a while, but you do need to keep the meter filled, so to speak, in order to keep the convenience of traveling anywhere with your home. Moving on to other parts of the interior, the private mobile base is a fairly large home with a number of rooms, including private quarters that you can use for your own personal comfort, and you also notice that the interior here is composed of Redoran architecture with a sort of cozy and atmospheric mix of decorations, small gardens, and also some very unique and creative weapon displays that adorn the walls and passageways of your abode. And really it has to be said that the private mobile base has a lot of just really scenic and creatively placed decorations, including the temple-like banners that adorn the hallways, making otherwise boring corridors into a fairly interesting and cozy part of the home, as you can sort of see here. And there's also a lot of storage, as you might imagine, including numerous shelves for display purposes, as you can see in this room here, and also containers like chests, closets, and crates to store your excess goods that you'd rather just not leave out into the open. And you'll also find a large number of side rooms that have various functions like bedrooms, such as this one, or small storage chambers or display halls scattered about the base that you can use for your own convenience. And one of the central display halls is actually the artifacts chamber that you can see here, which has a number of dedicated display cases and bookshelves, not to mention some very nice decorations and statue work that really helps to complete the sort of epic feeling of your collection. Another one of the convenience services offered by the private mobile base is a Dharma teleport chamber that can teleport you to any of the Dharma strongholds on Vvardenfell. Though like pretty much everything else in this mod, you're going to have to buy the keys to it first, and they certainly won't be cheap. And there's also a swimming pool for your character to use here, assuming you care at all about taking a swim or hygiene, and in any event, it's at least a scenic part of the base. And the sort of last thing to show off here is you'll also find a combat simulation chamber, where you can entertain yourself with some scripted fights if you so desire, like watching two imperfects go at one another, though who would win in that situation, I'm just really not sure. And you can also train your combat skills against a wide array of opponents by using these pylons down on the main floor here. And these will summon a number of creatures for you to fight and potentially kill, and if you should happen to find yourself in more trouble than you'd like, simply hit one of the dozens of panic buttons along the walls to just make them all disappear. And in any event, this is a classic house mod that's definitely worth a look. Finally, we have our bonus mod of the week, which this week is Fargoth's House of Earthly Delights by Twilight Spankle. And yes, this is, as you can imagine, a joke mod that does exactly what it says it does. It replaces all the dances with Fargoth, so you can finally have Fargoth dance for your own amusement. Just be sure to bring a lot of single septons to throw at them, and maybe they'll even be generous enough to give you a private lap dance. Or possibly more if you put a ring on it. And with that final disturbing image in your head, that pretty much wraps up everything I have for you guys this week. So until next time, you'll just have to live with that disturbing image of Fargoth exotic dancing burned into your mind for another 7 days. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next weekend with another 13 mods for your viewing pleasure.